In this fifth video, I'd like to share with you a couple of considerations regarding mind and matter and what they do with one another. In particularly, in the end, regarding the themes of trauma, dissociation, and trauma treatment. How should we understand ourselves? How should we understand traumatized people? How should we understand dissociation when we ask, what is, in the last analysis, the real heart of the matter? Is it a matter of matter? Or is it a matter of mind? Or both? And then, if both, what is their relationship? There are the basic questions to pose. Do they concern trauma, dissociation, and trauma treatment? Do they essentially concern matter? Is it, in the end, about physics? Or more specifically, is it a matter of our neurons and their interconnections? Or is the heart of the matter mental? And if so, is it mostly or primarily cognitive or affective or sensory or motor or sensory motor or motivational, behavioral perhaps, social, or any kind of combination of these? And you may wonder for yourself, what do I think? What is my idea? Are we as organisms, and more specifically as injured organisms, are we matter? Are we mind? If we are mind, then what are we? Or is it, in the end, a matter of behavior? I hear some background noises, Geronde. Can you please check if some mics are open, perhaps? Or,
yes, but now that I'm not host anymore, that was the whole point of me being host, to switch on.
yeah, let's see.
I can't switch. Can everyone please mute their microphones? Thank you. The question has done so.
Okay. These questions actually are very old questions. They have been around for ages, and all sorts of answers have been given. It is a struggle. It is a struggle to conceive and relate mind and matter, mind and body, mind and brain. For example, as most of you will know, Descartes was struggling with the issue too. Following a lot of contemplation, he said, there are two substances. We call the one matter and the other mind. Matter is that which has volume. Mind cannot be expressed in terms of volume, can only be expressed in terms of consciousness. That entailed philosophical dualism, two principles, two substances. Now, a substance is that which is in itself and can only be studied through itself. If that is what a substance is, then the Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia asked, how can matter and mind, affect, influence each other if they are, as you say, Professor Descartes, different substances? How would that work? And there is a very interesting communication between the two. It is clear that the princess was a very clever woman. And this interaction, this correspondence is still available. You find it on the internet easily. The letters written by Descartes and the letters written by the princess. And in the end, Descartes could not really come up with a good answer. Basically, he had no answer how mind and matter would affect each other. Spinoza said And Spinoza knew the works of Descartes very well. He translated many of Descartes' works. He said, two substances who include different attributes, different properties, are different. Two substances, those who have different attributes, have nothing in common. And things which have nothing in common cannot influence each other, cannot affect each other. The one cannot be the cause of the other. Because basically it said, Descartes, it can't work that way. It can't be that way. We return to Spinoza's answer a little later. Have we lost dualistic thinking since the 17th century? Well, consider these terms: psychosomatic. Do we have any clear idea when we use the word psychosomatic how psyche and soma would influence each other? Or whether the one is dominant over the other, or the other over the first? What do we actually mean when we say psychobiology or neuroception? Seption comes from perception, and neuro, that's stuff, that's matter, the neurons. Do the neurons have perceptions? Does it make sense to say that neurons perceive? How would they do that? And for what reason? What would guide their perception? And then, how would a neuroception become a perception? Somebody's perception. How would that work? I came across the term neurotherapy. What does that mean? These also say, we propose a neurotherapy. And that neurotherapy is different from common psychotherapy. But here I would ask, aren't the neurons not involved in common psychotherapy then? Isn't the idea of psychotherapy to change in part the brain, how it works, for example? Then how would that be different? And how would things that the patient and the therapist do together really directly affect the neurons if the neurons are different from the persons? Psychosocial, biopsychosocial. Do these terms not point to dualism? Or how should we understand them? There are those lingering riddles. For example, how do matter and mind relate to each other? How does the brain relate to the mind and in reverse? How does the brain to the wider body, and the wider body to the brain, and the brain to the environment, and parts of the brain to other parts of the brain, and parts of the mind to other parts of the mind? How are these connections, and why do they come about? And then clearly the causal question. What causes what? Think for yourself. What do you think? Do you have a mind because you have a brain that's in operation? And does your brain somehow generate the mind? Or would you say, no, mind, that is perception, conception, ways of taking things, that comes first, and matter is what follows. For example, when I engage in particular thoughts, then my brain turns wild. Or when I have a good degree of affect regulation, I can calm myself down at the physical level. If you think that way, then it would be the mind that affects, causes, features of the brain. Is that what you think? Or can it work either way? And if that is your position, then how would you say that the mind actually does the trick? Or how does the brain, matter, does the trick of influencing the mind? Where would it happen? Some philosophers and psychologists have tried to overcome dualism and revert to monism. Does not ground the whole project of psychology, psychiatry, and understanding people more generally in terms of mind and matter, or mind or matter, but they say in the end there's only one thing. And what could it look like? Well, it could be materialism, physicalism, which is the approach, the idea that matter is in the end all there is. That mind is something that is being generated by matter under particular circumstances. That's a monism. Another monism is idealism. That is, the first principle of all is consciousness. Everything starts with consciousness. Matter is something that we are conscious of. And the idea here is, in philosophical idealism, that matter follows the mind. Two types of philosophical monism. Is that perhaps what you think? That in the end, all is matter? Or the other idea, in the end, the only thing that really grounds everything is ideas. Philosophical materialists feel that everything involves matter and can thus be reduced to matter. Science is basically reductive. Our understanding, our psychology, generally is also reductive. We try to reduce the manifold things there are to something more simple. Reductive. We are, if we do that. The idea here is that if we would completely know matter and its organization, then we would know all. This is the position taken, for example, by the Dutch neuroscientist Dick Swamp, who says in the end, not only you are matter, no, he makes it more specific. He says, you are your brain. Because what we essentially are is our brain. There's no body, there's not an environment that is essential. No, you are your brain. That's what you are. Joseph Ledoux, another world famous and highly respected neuroscientist, and don't get me wrong, I do appreciate his works a great deal, said, you are your synapses. And when he says that, and if he would mean that seriously, then I'm in trouble. Because then I would be, in the end, my synapses. But then, how can synapses, for example, make meaning? Synapses matter. How does matter make meaning? If you look at matter, if you study matter, you see it nowhere. You see nowhere that matter makes meaning. Matter can interact with other matter in mechanistic ways. At the level of quanta, you have probability, because you have in part determinism, you have in part probabilistic ideas. But where is meaning? If we are a set of synapses, if we are a brain, if the brain is a kind of fancy machine, then how does the machine produce something like, I care for myself, I care about you, I like something, I hate something, I'm ashamed of something? Where does meaning come from? How can we evaluate matter? How does matter evaluate itself? These answers are out in the open. The brain would be an agent, an instance, an entity that does things, that engages in actions. And not seldom parts of the brain are seen, conceived of as little men, little women in the head that do things. What do they do? If you follow the common cybernetic metaphor, saying that actually our brain is a complex computer, what it does is it receives and sends information from one place to the next. And sometimes it is said that these homunculi, these little men, these little women, these parts of the brain give meaning. How they do that and why they do that is not explained. It is sort of put on the table. However, the whole idea of understanding ourselves is to understand how we make meaning and what meaning is. But now the question of how we make meaning is sort of moved to a part of the brain. And it is simply said that part of the brain makes meaning. But that leaves open the question how a part of the brain would do that. It's still very much the same problem. Materialism and cybernetic metaphors also include the idea that the external world is internally represented. What was on the outside enters the system through input, and the input is turned in neural representations. The neural representation is something that represents that which was on the outside. But now the world is inside, and I still have the same trouble. How do I know my representations? If we think in a materialistic fashion, the representation is a pattern of brain activity. But how then does that brain activity find meaning, find information? It must have a norm doing that, because you can conceive of the world in millions of ways. What informs you is not something that can be said in the abstract. What informs me when I look into a room or into a scenery might be something very different from what informs you. Information is not something that does something by itself. No, we must perceive ourselves and the world and our linkage with the world in a particular way. And that takes a norm. There must be a guiding principle. But that guiding principle cannot be found in matter. Because it is totally obscure how these homunculi in the brain could take decisions, could receive and send information. In the end, the idea is that these neural representations affect each other in particular ways, and in the end you get output, and that's behavior. If this were true, then according to the physicalist, trauma dissociation and trauma treatment would in the end be a matter of matter. It would be a drama within the skull. It's skull encaged. This is where neuroscience would seem to lead us. It's reductive, it reduces the mind to the brain, it largely ignores, if not completely, the body. It says that there's a real world outside, that things exist in and of themselves, and that representations are more or less correct stand-ins for the world. And it's mechanical. The brain is a computer. It processes information. For example, the guiding theory of EMDR, the way as Shapiro tried to understand EMDR and why it is effective, how it works, in terms of information processing. Information processing is all over the place in psychiatry and psychology. But then again, what is information? What is processing? What is in the end meaning making? Those questions are not answered. Here we have a description of eye movement integration therapy, a variation of EMDR. It's described by Struik and van Breda, and the inventors of this method, neurotherapy. Dualism there, neurotherapy, matter, mind. And don't get me wrong, I've read the paper, I highly value what these people do. They try to help in as brief, in as few sessions as possible, traumatized children. They've invented the method. What I'm having trouble with is not with their therapy, it's with their explanation. I've taken this, not to call names, but to give an example for you, how these ideas, these cybernetic and materialistic models are indeed all over the place here. Let's read it together. In brief, trauma follows a specific pathway in the brain. Trauma, what is that? An event? The experience of an event? What is it? In any case, what it is said that it follows a specific pathway in the brain. Okay, it walks through the brain, so to speak. What are the steps, the phases? First, there's information received. Wait a minute, information, what is that? Is that covariation, as the original meaning of information is, as given by Shannon? Information is covariation between one thing and another. But then a thing in the world can co-vary with many, many other things. What is then information? And what informs me? What makes the selection? It's not said. And it is received as if the world sort of works on us where we are passive, we are the recipients. We are not actors, no, we receive it through our senses and the body. This information, whatever that may be, is sent to the locus coeruleus, the structure in the brainstem. And that is a little man or woman, because it has miraculously the power to evaluate. However, evaluation is something that we understand in terms of mind. Matter cannot evaluate. There's now suddenly there is in this portrayal a brain structure, a part of the brain that has a cognitive ability. It is not said how or why that would be so. And apart from that, evaluation was the thing to be explained. And now the explanation is simply put in another place. Now the question is not how do I, as Elliot, evaluate something. Now the question is how does Elliot's locus coeruleus evaluate something? But still the question is out there, what is that evaluation and how is that done? It's the same question. The question is not answered.
Can you please close the windows because the Portuguese birds are causing background noise.
Yes, thanks. Good. The description goes on. The information that is evaluated in the locus coeruleus, as it is said, is now being sent forward to the amygdala. And again, there is evaluation. Because now the amygdala is also a little man, a little woman in the head, able to evaluate information. And it evaluates it for emotional content. Apparently, the amygdala knows what is the cognitive content and what is the emotional content, and it says, cognitive content is not my business, I'm going to evaluate the emotional content. How that is done, how this mental feature is present in the amygdala is not said. The amygdala then sends the information to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is involved in memory, we know that. And here it is said that the hippocampus assigns cognitive information and routes it to the orbitofrontal cortex. Because now the hippocampus also has mental features. It assigns cognitive meaning to the information and routes it further. And the orbitofrontal cortex does the same thing. It does particular things of a mental nature, and that in the end is led to the cerebral cortex that organizes survival behavior. And that is what trauma would do in the brain. And here you see that all these features that I've listed for you are present in this description. And basically, no answer is given to the real thing. How do we make meaning? And why do we make meaning at all? Why would matter care about itself? If the therapy works, this neurotherapy, then the idea is, and that it works, is shown in changing pictures of the traumatic scene. If these pictures of the traumatic incident are changed, then that is, Struik and Van Beda says, an indication that integration of the trauma material has taken place. In other words, that the implicit and explicit memory related to amygdala and hippocampus, respectively, have become reconnected and integrated. Wait a minute, were they then connected before? And what made them be connected at all? And now they have become integrated due to neurotherapy. Because apparently the therapy does something at the neuronal level, something changes at the neuronal level, and now experience is different. I repeat myself. The question, how matter makes mind, is not answered. Cognitivism has reigned in psychology and by extension in psychiatry for many, many decades now. The idea in cognitivism is this: there is an objectively existing world. The world is stuffed with information, and man can passively perceive this world, this information. And perception, cognition, memory crucially involve generating, possessing, and using mental representations of this world. Because the world is there, it contains, it is said, information, and that information is now put in representations. Let's take one example. The idea is we experience something and we encode it, as it is said. Now the experience, there's an experience, and it becomes encoded in my computer brain. Now I have my memory. It's stored, it's there in the brain. At a later point in time, I want to pick up my memory. I want to find my memory again. How do I do that? Within my brain, there will be millions of memories. How do I, out of all memories in my brain, find the memory related to this event? How can I ever find it if I not already know that this stands for that? But if this stands for that, and if I must know that that is the case, then I already presuppose memory. Otherwise, I could never make that connection. There are deep, deep problems in the idea of encoding, storage, and retrieval, if you cast it in terms of representations. Apart from this, if we have a pattern of neural activation, how do we know that that is a mental representation of something? How do we know that? What we see is a pattern of neural activation. How can we know what that pattern of activation is about? How can we ever know what it is like to have a particular representation activated in the brain? That is the thing that matter can tell us. And for that matter, no one has a clue or even an idea what an explanation of how matter would generate mind would look like. Still, somehow, matter and mind are totally disconnected. And to the extent how it works. I may say some things a little bit strong, but I try to convey the basic problem that's out there, and that is not always seen. Here, for example, we have here a study done on a group of people, and they were living in different phases, so to speak. In one phase, they were engaging in a particular activity, and that went together with brain activity in the parts of the brain here marked as red. In another phase, they were engaged apparently in a different activity, and they had a brain pattern of activation here marked in green. Now, what do we know? Do we know what the persons were doing when they were, say, in the pattern red or in the pattern green? Would we know it even if we knew everything about the brain? And even if we knew what they were sort of experiencing, then does looking at the brain tell you what it is like to have that experience? Is that what matter can tell you? It can't. Thus, materialism at some point must seriously fail. In conclusion, what I would like to propose is that philosophical materialists are one-sided. They overlook or ignore that scientific observation presupposes mind, that understanding experience presupposes experience. And at the same time, philosophical materialists are inclined to say, at least some of them, that mind is an epiphenomenon, a coincidental accompanying phenomenon, but not really the heart of the matter. We can also ask the materialist, you are talking about mechanisms, about deterministic, materialistic mechanisms. Now, it is my understanding that machines do not care about themselves. A machine does not mind if it works or not. Now, if we were fancy machines, then materialists, you tell me why we do care about ourselves. What is that caring about ourselves? How would you as a materialist relate to that? Can you answer the question, why do we give a damn about our existence? Henri Atlan, a French philosopher and biologist, and very knowledgeable about Spinoza. He said, we witness a kind of dematerialization of physics, that's the science of matter, in parallel with the materialization of the sciences of life, that's the mind sciences. He says that is a curious development. Physics becomes ever more, when it comes to understanding the smallest particles known at the present time, we cannot see them, we cannot feel them, we can only suppose they're there in mathematical formulas. We create complex mathematical formulas predicting the outcomes of experiments, physical experiments. And these mathematical formulas include the idea that there are particular quanta of energy, quanta, various types. And these hypotheses by now are so good that we can have iPhones. Without quantum mechanics, you could not have an iPhone, for example. Thus, it works, quantum mechanics works, but in the end, we must make idealistic assumptions what matter at heart is. Idealistic assumptions, hypotheses, ideas. Thus at heart now, the science of matter becomes idealistic, not just, but also. And at the same time, we see that psychology has a strong tendency to become ever more materialistic. That is very curious development. That's basically also what this slide says. Now, should we go for the other monism, philosophical idealism, where it is thought that mind is the cause of it all, ideas are the cause of it all. The world is my idea, Schopenhauer said, and he said many, many other things as well. Here I incline to think and to ask the philosophical idealist, can the mind exist without a material body, a material world? Because I would think that I can have consciousness as much as I live. And in order to live, I must constitute my identity as an organism. And when I need to constitute my identity as an organism and need to maintain my existence and evolve, then I need particular stuff called food, called air, called fluids. I cannot gain energy from the idea of calories. I need real calories. Thus, it cannot be true, I would say, that the mind is the cause of it all. Otherwise, I could simply think, imagine calories, and feed myself through it. And that doesn't work. Of course, there's more to be said regarding philosophical idealism, much more. I won't go there, but ask now, could there be another monism? And could that monism eventually help us to understand trauma and dissociation and therapy? Because that is, in the end, of course, our concern. Spinoza said there is one substance, not two, because two substances cannot influence each other. There's one substance. We could say one complex system. And he called it God or nature. For Spinoza, the same thing. To understand his philosophy, we need to understand his basic definitions. By substance, he meant that which is in itself and is conceived through itself. It's one system. Everything is part of that system and needs necessarily to be conceived through that system. You cannot step out of the system. We cannot step out of the universe to describe the universe. Because if we could do that, then we would be being out of the universe, we would have extended the universe with our existence from that place. Thus, a substance is that of which a conception can be formed independently of any other conception. All you need is that one system. That's a substance. And for that reason, of course, two substances cannot influence one another. Good. This system, this substance, can be known in various ways. It includes attributes. Many attributes. Ways of conceiving that system, that substance. Thus, by attribute, Spinoza said, I mean that which the intellect, or human intellect, perceives as constituting the essence of substance. And he said, we basically assign, attribute two properties. One property we assign, we refer to as matter, and another property we refer to as mind. They are features of the same system. They are just different ways of conceiving the same thing. And these attributes, let's take matter, can exist in different modes, modifications of a substance. Sometimes matter is like this, sometimes matter is like that. If we take mind, sometimes the matter is like this, sometimes like that, and then in third instance, different again. All different modes of matter, different modes of mind. And he said, we must understand these modifications of the substance on their own terms. If you would apply this now to the brain, he said, you can study the brain and you can study the brain as the brain, but you cannot jump from the brain to the mind. You can study the mind, understand, examine its different modes, but you cannot jump from the mind to matter, because they are different ways of conceiving. And what is then that singular substance that exists? It's God or nature, and being, absolutely infinite. That is a substance consisting in infinite attributes, of which each expresses eternal and infinite essentiality. Thus it's essential. This whole system, everything that is, can be known by us as matter and as mind. But matter cannot cause mind, and mind cannot cause matter, because they are different conceptions. Now, if we take that on board, we can understand trauma and dissociation, trauma treatment from different perspectives. We can look upon it from the perspective of matter and explore that, examine that, study that. And we can explore it, study it, conceive it as mind. Keeping in mind that it's still the same thing. And that, I have said in the Trinity of Trauma, is my point of departure. Spinoza's metaphysics. Monistic, the system showing itself in different attributes, and we know as humankind matter and mind. Thus we can talk about dissociative agents from the perspective of what do they entail at a level of matter, and what do they entail at a level of mind, but not say that one causes the other. And then the next step, we, as every form of life, we are not just a brain. We are embrained beings. We include a brain just as we include a body. Because we are organisms, I would say. And based on previous discussions, I say we are environmentally embedded organisms. We are organism environment systems. We are ecological systems. And the things that we do, what is at the core of the enactive approach is that we act. And we act for reasons that we have in the first video started to pinpoint as desire, as longing. Here, we have asked, is human existence actually a matter of the brain? That's the same, even Thompson said, as asking the bird, is your flying in the wings? And even Thompson, here on the right, he says, longing, feeling, seeing, thinking, remembering is not inside the brain. Wings facilitate flying. The brain facilitates seeing connections of the body and the environment. But it is wrong to say that everything that we have, experience, thinking, feeling, doing, acting, can be reduced to the brain, can be reduced to matter. Flying is not inside the wings. And who is the agent here? The agent is not the brain. It's not a part of the brain, not homunculi. It's not the body or part of the body. An agent is a whole organism, environmentally embedded organism. That's who an agent is. And we are an agent when we engage in actions, not just in movement, no, in action. And action is, per definition, goal-directed. And why do we act? Because we are longing. We long to be and to maintain our existence. We long to do things. If we are sitting with the patient and would have the idea that the patient, just as we as a therapist, would be brain, would be matter, then no doubt the interaction between these two individuals will be very different from when we would perceive the other person as an organism embedded in his or her world, now in touch with me for particular affective, motivational reasons. Just as we are sitting there because we long to sit there, we long to work with the patient, just as the patient longs to work with us to change him or herself. And it would be different if we saw matter just at the level of the brain and not also at the level of the body. And if we would see the body not as would see the body just as a material structure in comparison to what in German is said as Leib. Leib is the lived body. The lived body is the experiential body. And it would certainly make a huge difference if you would look upon the other person and yourself and your getting together in terms of two organisms meeting that include the features of matter and mind at the same time as different properties. Then you start to look at bodies in a different way. Then the way we think, it becomes clearer that the way we think is influenced by the bodies that we are. You will trace it also, for example, in language. This is the exceptionally important work of Lakoff and Johnson, who have pinpointed that we generally think in terms of metaphors, and that many, many metaphors and analogies actually are body related. You can check that for yourself. You can select 20, 30 verbs and see how often the verbs that we use to pinpoint abstract things can actually be related to very concrete things. We can't go on with this. I'm stumbling and falling over the issue. There's a knot in my head. I'm standing on firm ground here. I can start to include this idea into the whole warehouse of ideas that I'm already having, etc., etc., etc. It seems that our abstract language is sort of a derivative of our very concrete actions in the world. There's longing, feeling, perceiving, thinking, understanding, remembering, moving, speaking, behaving, gesturing, conceiving, all depend on the whole environmentally embedded body that is filled with desire. What do we do at the level of embodiment? According to Thompson and Varela in a beautiful paper, 2001, higher primate life involves three intimately related cycles of operation. There's organismic regulation of the whole body, of the entire body, eating, drinking, temperature regulation, many more things. The immune system also belongs to this level. There's the different level of sensory motor coupling between organism and environment. As we live, we constantly couple ourselves to our environment, just as the environment affects us. Remember Spinoza, we are affected by the environment just as we affect our environment. It's already an ecological thought. And then, of course, there's intersubjective interaction involving the recognition of the intentional meaning of actions and linguistic communication. We are inclined to try and understand each other, relate to one another, speak with one another. And we do that also at the level of our bodies. We dance together, we move together, we react to each other. And in trauma, there's also clearly intersubjective interaction. When there's threat, we defend. When there's threat, we say, don't do that. I can't take it. Another embodied metaphor. I cannot take it in. Life is very, very dynamical. We are dynamic. Our environment is dynamic. And our coupling is in constant movement. It's never exactly the same. It is a continuous manner of affectively charged sensory motor interaction with ourselves, with things, with events, with other people. An ongoing coupling, communication. That is what life is. It's not internally represented. It's not a drama in the head. Trauma is a matter of coupling and decoupling with a perpetrator, with a set of perpetrators, with terrible things happening in the world. It's coupling, it's decoupling. It's guided by longing, trying to find a way to make meaning out of that, to, in the end, continue existence. When we follow the path of embodiment and embedment, some authors are inclined to say that the body knows, aches, is framed by moments of joy and satisfaction, for example. I would be a little hesitant to follow that language because the body as such is not an agent. The agent is not the body understood as a material structure. No, it is the organism that knows, enjoys, suffers. And it is the organism that includes the attributes of body and mind. And if so, our challenge is to understand when it comes to dissociation, for example, what is the organism at the level of a dissociative part of this type and that type? And what do these dissociative agents do with one another? Understood at level of matter, understood at the level of mind. Spinoza said, man thinks. We should appreciate that in the 17th century, thinking stood for feeling, desiring, for cognizing the world, for remembering. It was a wide structure that basically included mind. We need to know that in order to understand some of Spinoza's sentences. Miranda, how much time do I have left?
3
3
minutes.
minutes. Oh my God.
But you can slowly
Then,
come to an
because
end.
I must start closing now. Is that the idea, Miranda?
Must. I don't know. You can take a look at how awake our viewers still are.
Oh, I see only 3 or 4 faces on the side, and I'm sad, but I don't see everyone. It might be a good idea to return to these issues later then, and then I will jump forward and show this. What you saw in red, the activation of apparently normal dissociative agents when they were listening to a trauma script. A script that described a situation that they, as a fragile emotional part or as a set of emotional parts, had reported. This is what happened to me. As the apparently normal part, they said, yeah, I know this happened to me, but it doesn't feel like that. Or I do know parts of it. I know it in a particular way, but basically it's not mine. And the fragile EP said, this is my memory. We had a description of that memory, and we had an audio tape, and it lasted only 90 seconds. And then we recorded brain activation using positron emission tomography. This is the first paper written by Reinders et al. And we noticed that ANP and EP had different patterns of brain activation. In this circumstance, when they were listening to a description of a rather neutral memory, a rather insignificant memory that they both had as the apparently normal part and as the fragile emotional part, we saw no difference at the level of the brain whatsoever. But we saw massive differences in patterns of neural activation as measured with positron emission tomography, as I said. But what can we say based on the ideas that I've tried to share with you? ANP is not a pattern of brain activation, but ANP shows itself at a level of matter in particular circumstances as a pattern of neural activation. Just as the ANP showed itself considered as matter as a particular pattern of physiological activation. And the same went for the fragile emotional part. Measured as matter, we can say that the EP manifested as this pattern of brain activation. And manifested as matter, it had its own pattern of physiology, much more arousal for the EP as compared to the ANP. ANP compared to the EP had more neocortical activation, and the EP compared to the ANP had more midbrain and brainstem activation. And this is how we can study it. We already have the dissociative agents. We can listen and tune into their existence as mind. We can listen to their experiences, to their memories. We can try and measure as precisely as we can in neuroscientific research what their phenomenology is. And then in very close proximity to the measurement of their neurophenomenology, we can measure their neurophysiology and their physiology. And then indirectly, we can compare the two. That is how far we can go and say that being an ANP and being an EP in these contexts, being embedded in the world at this particular time, is associated with particular patterns of brain activity. Spinoza would say it's the same thing, just measured differently. And this is the way how I understand our cells as human organisms. We include a variety of attributes that exist in different modes, and basically it's all about one thing. And in science, we can measure these different properties and indirectly relate the two to each other. And this is what Varela referred to as neurophenomenology. And I can say a bit more about that in the next video. And of course, if you have questions, and this is hard stuff, this should be clear, this is hard for all of us, but they are the real questions that are up there if we really want to understand dissociation and trauma. And then please pose your questions. If there are sufficient questions, we can do 2 hours. If there are few questions, as Kironda said, we will reduce it to 1 hour. And as here we are basically inviting you to become very inactive. Good. And this must be it. I thank you very much for your time, for your attention, and I'm looking forward to receiving your questions. And I'm also looking forward to our further discussions, of course. And I wish you a very good weekend. Granted, thank you.
Thank you for your time. Questions can be sent to questions@enijenhuis.nl. I can't put it in the chat box because it's been disabled by our host.
All right. Yeah, but I can stop doing that. I stopped doing that.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I think we're ready for the weekend.
Okay, I see now some more.
Process everything you've taught us today. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Have a good weekend, everyone.